All right, so the previous video, we basically just add this get most played movies URL that got us some JSON, and it was a string called response that we printed. So this video, what we want to actually do is start parsing JSON. And so first of all, let's back up a second and show you kind of JSON, since maybe I don't know how much you know about that. So we're going to copy this line of text, this JSON, and open Bing. And we're going to type in JSON formatter. And we have a Bing instant answer here that we can paste in the JSON and click format. And then you can copy that out of there. So Control A, Control C. Open Notepad and look at it. And so now it's just easier than one big line of text to look at it formatted this way. So this is our JSON answer for the most popular. So what we see to start with is, so this is like JavaScript notation. So the square brackets means it's an array of things. And so that means we're going to want an array. And then inside that array this is one element, which is open curly to that following closing curly, and then this is the next element, open curly to the closing curly, and this is the next element, open curly to the closing. So you can see kind of the elements of this array. So this is an array. Within that array, we basically have a JSON object, and then the object has properties like play count, and it has properties like movie, but movie is another JSON object. So we can see that it's movie, instead of just a value or a string, it's curly braces. So it's a JSON object, and that JSON object has a title that's a string, a year that's probably an int or long, and an IDs that's a JSON object, and that JSON object has things like a slug. So let's go ahead and try to parse that out. So to start with, I have at the bottom here a JSON parse array that we want to try running. So let's call JSON parse array response and run that. See what happens. Cool. So it took this response string and it printed out each item in the JSON array. But we actually want to go ahead and try to extract some of this data. And so let's, instead of parse JSON array, let's call it parse most played movies. Okay. That's my dog in the background. I think you can probably hear him. Okay. Parse most played movies. Cool. So we start off with the JSON parser. We parse the response string, and that gives us a JSON array. And then we're going to walk through the array, which is called an iterator. So make an iterator of JSON objects is what's inside of our array. And then while their iterator has a next object, similar to like how we did the has next and stuff for reading input, while it has a next object, we call next to read that object, and that's our JSON object. And then right now we're just printing it, so that's printing out each one of these. So this was our array, we iterated through, and then for each one of these we have an object like that. So let's go ahead here and we'll say object.get play count, and that's maybe a long play count equals a long, and let's run that and see what happens. Okay, it didn't throw an exception. Let's try integer, which is what we've been using in class. See if it also works. It doesn't. So in this case, you get an exception here when we try to read play count as an integer when it's actually a long, and you see class cast exception Java lang long cannot be cast to a Java lang integer. So if you see whatever cannot be cast to what you're casting it to, that gives you a hint that this is the thing you need to try to cast it to instead. Okay, so back to long. Long, so that's our play count. And then we have a movie here. So let's do JSON object movie equals JSON object.get movie. Okay, so I think that gave us this movie object. Let's go ahead and run it, see if we get any errors. Okay, we didn't get any errors. So then we need the title. So that looks like a string, I think. Title is string movie.get title. So on our movie object, which was a JSON object, there was a title, which looks like a string. There's a year, so it's probably a long year, long movie.get year. Let's go ahead and run that. Okay, no exceptions. And then let's try to get the slug. So we need IDs, which IDs is another JSON object. So JSON object IDs, JSON object, and that's on our movie object. So movie.get IDs. Let's run that. When we run it, we're just checking for exceptions every so often. Nope. Okay, and then slug string slug equals IDs get slug. Okay, we're getting an error now because we're not casting it to a string. Okay, and that ran. So now let's go ahead and print out count, play count, tab movie. No, movie's a JSON object title. Title, year, slug, slug. Okay, run that. Great. So now we're having the count the title. Notice there's colons in the title sometimes. Um, the year and the slug. So I think that's fairly good. One more thing I think that maybe is helpful for when you're debugging is if you have a JSON object, so movie is an example of a JSON object. There's a method on here called toJSON string that will make it back to a string so you can print it out and see what's on it, what's in there. So you can see now there's a curly brace on our movie object, which means it's an object. And there's a property year, a property IDs that is of type JSON object, and that thing has these properties. And this is the end of IDs, and then there's a title. Also, the order is not guaranteed, but you're just calling get, so it doesn't matter about the order. So at this point, yeah, that's basically how you would parse all this data. Normally, instead of being void, you would probably return a class or whatever property you were looking for, or an array of stuff, or a list of the class you wanted to make, and you would new one of those and set its play count, its title, its year, or whatever, and return those objects. Or else you do all your work inside of here, depending on, just depends on what you're trying to do. So hopefully that gives you some idea of how to take JSON strings and parse them into JSON.